Well, Donna, let's rewind the clock, shall we? 2 years ago, the size and scale of your review was unprecedented in NHS history. You said at the time, we have been given a once-in-a-generation opportunity to improve the safety and quality of maternity service provision for families across England, now and in the future. It was a blueprint for maternity services. It was going to make history, change the face of maternity care. Finally, 2 years on, what happened?
I recall exactly those words about the blueprint for maternity, the roadmap, changing maternity services, you know, in a once-in-a-generation way. And we owed that to the 1,500 plus families who came forward to the Shrewsbury and Telford review. Since then, and we are now 2 years and 2 months down the line since the publication of the Shrewsbury and Telford report, since then, there has been some progress, but I think my assessment now is that progress is wholly insufficient.
When we spoke on Sky News on the day that your report was published, you said you had an absolute expectation that the actions would be implemented locally and nationally. When you say there has been some progress, how many of your actions have been actioned? So
you'll remember that on the day of publication, the then Health and Social Care Secretary, Sajid Javid MP, fully endorsed and fully accepted all of our immediate and essential actions. And actually the government promised swift action. If we just look at the issue that underpins the delivery of all safe maternity care, which is funding, workforce and training, we've made really disappointing progress on that. So in our work, we echoed the Health Select Committee report of June 2021. The chair of that Health Select Committee at the time was Jeremy Hunt MP. The recommendation from the Select Committee report, endorsed by us and accepted by government, was a minimum of £200 to £350 million to be spent immediately on maternity services. The Select Committee report were really clear that that sum had to be kept under review and adjusted upwards as more was learnt about maternity workforce. Where we are is we've had around £180 million in total pledged to maternity services. So even if we say that we needed 350 million, that's about halfway there. Now, I'm not an economist, but we all know that inflation has ravaged this country. Costs have gone up. And indeed, there's now new work by Sands and Tommy's that suggests even the 350 million is wholly insufficient. So I have to say to you today, we are significantly less than halfway where we should be in terms of finance. And without finance, we can't adequately grow our workforce, recruit and retain our multi-professional workforce. And without the workforce, staff are not getting time to either care or train appropriately.
You wanted nearly 350 million, you got around 180 million from government so far. What's the new estimate? What is it that's thought is needed now to action your point?
So Sands and Tommy's published a new report this week, the same week as the All-Party Parliamentary Group published a report into birth trauma, and they are estimating a revised sum of somewhere near 1 billion.
That's a huge jump in funding, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Childbirth is not safe for women in England. That was one of the lines from your report that made headlines at the time. Is that still the case now, do you think, in light of what you've said?
There is a postcode lottery in terms of quality. Not all women are getting the consistently safe maternity care that they deserve. Some women are more equal than others, it would seem. We've got persistent inequalities in terms of the experiences and the outcomes for women living in deprivation, Asian minority women and black women compared to their white counterparts. There are just so many inequalities that are persisting and are not improving.
Can we talk about racial disparities as you brought it up? Because that needs to be addressed. The statistics are shocking. Black women are nearly 4 times more likely than white women to die within 6 weeks of giving birth. You talked about the birth trauma review in the report that came out this week, and racial disparities were addressed in that. But there was some criticism that out of 12 actions, recommendations, they came 11th out of 12 in terms of, is this being taken seriously enough? Is there a need, do you think, for a specific independent review? As I said, you know, it was covered in part in the birth trauma report, but is there a need for a specific plan for black women?
I talk to and listen to black women on a really regular basis in Nottingham. They describe to me discrimination through all aspects of their care. They call out and say to me there is institutionalised racism in all aspects of their care. I mean, Birthrights and the Motherhood Group have done some fantastic work in highlighting the issues for black women. If black women feel, if they are saying to you that they need a further independent report looking into their experiences, I would fully support that, because I can't sit here and say, well, that's not needed. Absolutely, if black women say that, then that is what is needed. But I think it is important to say that Embrace deliver annual reports on the state of maternity services. The most recent one late in 2023, highlighting persistent inequalities for women living in deprivation, minority ethnic women, including Asian women and black women. The information is there, and what is needed now is action. I've said in the last few days, warm words are no longer enough. Action needs to happen, and it needed to happen a long time ago.
How angry are you about this, that the action isn't being taken on the level you think is needed?
I am angry. I'm disappointed. I feel that the 1,500 families who gave so much of their time, their energy and their commitment to the Shrewsbury Review have been let down. I think that we need to honour the 1,300 women and their families who came forward to the birth trauma inquiry, and we have to remember that we now have over 1,900 families actively involved in the Nottingham Review. Behind all of these numbers are accounts of lives that have been changed forever. You know, no one falls in love, sets up a family and says, oh, you know, our ambition is to be a number in one of Donna Ockenden's reports. And I do hear on a daily basis accounts of lives that have been torn apart, changed, and I can't put them back together again.
Something that came out from your report into Shrewsbury and Telford, and also from the birth trauma report, women are not being listened to. Do you think you're being listened to?
I hope that I am being listened to. I certainly use my voice wherever I can to get right to the top of government. I think that the progress, there's a very great difference between listening, hearing and getting things done. So I will keep using my voice wherever I can. Government appear to listen, but what is now missing is that absolute commitment to visible, meaningful change. So if we just go back to the money for a moment, we knew that we needed £350 million increase in spending in maternity services, not for luxury, not for gold-plated, but to make sure that we had the right number of midwives, obstetricians, anaesthetists, neonatologists, neonatal nurses, and so on. We know that we haven't had that money. NHS trusts, NHS England will keep doing their best with the resources they've got, but if it isn't enough, it isn't enough. So more than listening, what we need now is action from government.
How do you follow up on that? Because as I said, you've moved on to another review now, looking into the same problems. How do you follow up? You were clear in your report, you outlined actions. Is there a disconnect between your report being published and what happens in government? Have you spoken to the current Secretary of State for Health now, Victoria Atkins.
I met Secretary of State Atkins very, very briefly at the launch of the birth trauma report. We have an appointment in the diary in about 6 weeks' time, I think, to meet. I will be very clear in my requests of the Secretary of State, and I think our office already know what I will be saying, which is that we need to move at pace to implement those immediate and essential actions. You will remember that they were not recommendations. I don't use the word recommendations. They were immediate and essential actions. They are 26 months old, if my adding up is correct. They haven't been fully implemented.
And the families that take part in your reviews, they do it because they want to understand what happened to them, as well as to ensure that finally lessons are learned and this doesn't happen to other families. Do they also want accountability? I know that your review and your end report doesn't apportion blame, but do they get accountability? Because we hear time and time again about scandals and no one held accountable, whether it be heads of trusts that move on, secretaries of state changing. Yet these families do not have that option of moving on. They seem to be the only ones that are punished in all of this.
I think you're absolutely right there. One of the mothers that I'm in contact with now through the Nottingham review uses such a painful statement. She says, we are the people who have been given a life sentence. So they live with the completely avoidable death of their beautiful baby. And, you know, her husband, the younger sister of the baby who died, they are all left with this continual pain that the loss of their baby was completely avoidable.
You get the seriousness of it. I get it. People watching this interview get it. The families certainly know it all too well. How do you feel personally that this hasn't moved on? Those actions haven't been taken. You handed it over, this blueprint. Just want to get a sense of personally how you feel about that.
The blueprint was fully endorsed by all the Royal Colleges and professional organisations and families, and finally fully endorsed by government. So the missing piece of the jigsaw here is that lack of action, that very slow pace of action by government. It's extremely frustrating. It is distressing. The families who put so much into the Shrewsbury and Telford review, the families who are campaigning so hard now for an improvement in maternity safety across this country deserve much, much better.
Some of the stories we've been hearing over the past few weeks on Sky News as part of the birth trauma report have been harrowing. They'll stay with me, they'll stay with our viewers for a long time. And the question that I came away with is, how did we get to the point where maternity care is ignoring women's pain? Where's the compassion? In too many cases, maternity has been doing the opposite of what it's meant to do. It's being uncaring. How has that happened?
I heard some of those accounts from the all-party parliamentary group. I've read the report. I mean, harrowing, distressing, appalling. I mean, they're the right...
damage done to these women and their families.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are the right words. Every woman in this country deserves safe, kind and compassionate maternity care. It's very clear that there are a significant number who are not receiving that. And there can be no excuses for poor care. What I will say is that, you know, in conversation with midwives and obstetricians and others providing that perinatal around birth care, I'm told about the fact that obstetric staffing rotas across the country have all got gaps in. There are not enough doctors. Midwives do not have time to care, and they are honest and open about that. Last year, the Royal College of Midwives told us that midwives and support workers are doing around 100,000 hours a week of unpaid overtime. So they looked at it again this year. Had it got better? No, it had got worse. My understanding is that it's gone up now to 118,000 hours a week of unpaid overtime.
So is what you're saying is that the focus is on trying to prop up the service and keep people safe. So there is no time in so many cases for compassion.
That will be part of the issue, a very large part of the issue. You know, I do hear accounts of women being cared for, perhaps 2 women in labour being cared for by the same midwife, midwife A running from room 1 to room 2. We know that increasingly the women in our population are more high risk and that their care needs are very complex. We know that deprivation that we hear about on our TV screens, you know, every night of the week, you know, comes into maternity services. It doesn't stop at the front door. So in one sense, very, very clearly, I want to say there is no excuse in maternity services for unkind care, care that lacks compassion, rudeness and plain nastiness. There's no excuse for that. But on the other hand, what we need to acknowledge is that we've been told for a very long time now that midwives don't have time to care. And I think we should also mention, you know, postnatal care for women at home. So when I was preparing for the all-party parliamentary group, a number of health visitor colleagues contacted me. They'd heard that I was going to be giving evidence. And the word they wanted me to use to describe their ability or not to be able to give care was, Donna, tell them health visiting services have been vaporised in the last 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. It's all gone. We can't do it anymore. We do not have the number of health visitors we need to provide that early days, early months care.
Donna, let's have a final thought from you. A call to action, if you like, as we go into what is a general election year. What do you see? What do you want to see happen from this point on? Because you feel, on behalf of those families, that so far you've been let down in what you've called for.
So what do we need? We need a commitment from government and actually from the opposition that all of the immediate and essential actions in those 2 Ockenden reports will be fully implemented at pace. So I'd like to hear all politicians from whichever side of the House give that commitment. I think to not do that risks letting down mothers, families and babies, and it lets down and dishonours the 1,500 families from Shrewsbury, the 1,900 families from Nottingham and the more than 1,300 women who so honestly shared their experiences in the recent birth trauma report.
Donna, thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thank you.